Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. That is, my channel is simply called Discerning What is True. I'm sharing this information tonight that is on the 16th day of July, 2024. I'm going to be reading the Pagan Christ, that is chapter 5. It was all written before in Egypt by Tom Harpur. So let's get to the particular book and let's do some reading. Thank you for being here. This is part 1 of chapter 5, I gather. So we see how long we get and how far we go here. So this is called Ancient Egyptian Religion. And the first part here is from the book called Who is this King of Glory? Which was Alvin Boyd Kuhn's book. Alvin Boyd Kuhn is a brilliant writer. If you'd like to know more about early Christianity, he's the man with Gerald Massey. So here's the quote. All that went into the making of the Christian historical setup was long pre-existence as something quite other than history, was in fact especially non-historical in the Egyptian mythology and eschatology. For when the sun at the Easter equinox entered the sign of the fishes, that is Pisces, about I guess, I don't know what that is, maybe a misprint there. I guess it's 200 BCE. The Jesus who stands at the fountain of Christianity was at least 10,000 years of age and had been traveling hither at the every coming one through all preceding time. During those 10,000 years, that same incarnation of the divine idea in the character of Isus or Horus, the coming sun, had saturated the mind of Egypt with its exalting influence. Little did men of that epoch dream that their figure of man's divinity would in time be rendered historical as a man of flesh. So they never understood it as being a literal interpretation long ago. So many of you, if you like me, have always been intrigued by the mystery surrounding ancient Egypt, but the average person won't have a working understanding of Egyptian religion, mostly because the symbolism has often been so poorly explained. Even modern Egyptologists, in their scientific approach, have tended to miss or dismiss its intermeaning. This short account will help the reader see the background for all that follows. Like the Christian many millennia later, the ancient Egyptians believed in a God who was self-created, self-existent, immortal, invisible, eternal, and omniscient, almighty, and inscrutable. He was the maker of the heavens and the earth, sky and sea, men and women, animals, birds, fish, and creepy things, trees and plants, and the incorporated beings were the messenger, that is, angels, that fulfilled his wish and word. The whole of Egyptian religion and theology was based on this belief. That is, one hymn from the pyramids says, quote, "O, thy divine child, who didst create thyself, I am not able to describe thee," end quote. In amazing fashion, this belief persisted from the very beginning. True, a seemingly polytheistic set of ideas and beliefs also was cultivated from time to time, but more as personification of natural forces and powers, much as in Hinduism. The idea of monotheism, as I read it, was never lost sight of. On the contrary, it had been reproduced in the religious literature of all periods. This is particularly true of the various re-editing of that corpus known as the Egyptian Book of the Dead. The word used of other deities was not actually our word God, but Neter, N-E-T-E-R, a spiritual aspect of the one God. In his work called Egyptian Religion by Sir Wallace Budge, the controversial keeper of Egyptian and Assyrian antiquities in the British Museum a century ago, describes the ancient Egyptians as standing easily, that is, quote, first among the nations in his capacity for development and in his ability for evolving conceptions about God and the future life, which are claimed as the peculiar product of the most cultural nations of our time. Siegfried Moritz, in his well-known book called Egyptian Religion, says that in spite of differences, quote, we can speak of an Egyptian religion which has one fundamental point in common with Christianity. That is, the reality of a God who is in man and above men. Did you hear that? The reality of a God who is in man and above men. What it's pointing out simply is the Spirit of God is already in you. No matter where you were born, what day, whatever, what color you are, is all there. The tools are there. I mean, this is what the sad part about people. They think God is outside themselves. In reality, simply he's already within you. Somebody's been lying to you about all this, you see, because men like to rule over other men. And they'll do it for money or popularity. All your pastors out there, preachers, are a part of that. In the light of this present book, what was particularly important was the Egyptian belief in a anthropomorphic divinity or Christ idea, whose life in this world and the world beyond was typical of the ideal life of man. The chief embodiments of this quote unquote divinity were, of course, Osiris and his son Horus. Neither, however, were ever regarded as historical. No, there never were. People looking for this particular person, it's not going to be found. A list of the names of all the gods of Egypt would fill pages, but all these gods were only forms, you see, attributes, or phrases of Ra, that is the solar god, who himself was the supreme symbol or metaphor for God. Quote, the educated classes in Egypt never placed the gods on the same high level as the one God, and they never imagined that their views on the point could be mistaken, end quote. Budge states. Budge was immensely gifted too, and he had the guts to basically speak the truth. Not these clowns out there now. He knew that the responsibility to tell the truth to those way back in late 1800s and early 1900s. He had the ability to, quote unquote, stand in himself and had a good character about who he was. Ra was undoubtedly the oldest of the gods' worship, and his name belongs to such a remote period that his full meaning is unknown. He was in all periods the visible emblem of God, end quote, says Budge. A hymn inscribed in the tomb of Set, S-E-T-I, 1, that is around 1370 BCE, before Christ, that is, reads, quote, praise be unto thee, O Ra, thy exalted power, thy one who brings us into being that which has been begotten. Behold, thy body is Horus, end quote. In other words, Horus, the son of Osiris and Isis, is himself an aspect of Ra. Indeed, Budge says, quote, we find everywhere the attempt being made to emphasize that every god, that is Neter, N-E-T-E-R, whether foreign or native, was an aspect or form of Ra. Here are some typical descriptions from the ancient texts. Quote, this is number 1. God is one and alone, and none other is existence with him. In other words, he's self-existence, you see. There's no one who made him. He's always existed. He lives in a timeless perspective. He's not a part of time. So that means he never had mom and dad, all that kind of thinking, you see. 2, God is the one creator who has made all things. Correct. Who else could do it? 3, God is a spirit, a hidden spirit. That is, the spirit of spirits, the divine spirit. 4, God is from the beginning. God, yeah, Alpha and the Omega, before all things, because he's timeless again. You see, we don't understand that particular deal because simply we live in a time mechanism today. We think, oh, well, there has to be something. No, sorry. It doesn't work that way. He was when nothing else had been, he shall endure to all eternity. Of course he will. He'll live forever. Again, time does not control him. You see, unlike us. God is truth. God is life. He liveth life to humanity, and he breathed the breath of life into his nostrils. God is father and mother, the father of fathers. He is creator of the heavens and the earth. He is the primordial potter, P-O-T-T-E-R, who turned men and gods into being out of his hands. There are also passages which remind me of those in Isaiah 40, where the Egyptian text says, quote, the heavens rest upon his head, and the earth supports his feet, end quote. Also, I am also reminded of the Psalms and the following words being, quote, God is merciful unto those who reverence him, and he heareth him that call upon him. He protects the weak against the strong, and hears the cry of him that is bound in feathers, end quote. And in the passage reminiscent of Genesis chapter 1, we learned that the Egyptian believed in a time when nothing existed, neither heaven nor earth, except for the boundless primeval water, Nun, N-U, which was shrouded in thick darkness. Quote, at length the Spirit spoke the word, and creation was the result. It is clear that at one time, quote, the Egyptian greatest hope seemed to have been that he might not only become divine, that is, the Son of God, by adoption, but that Ra would actually become his father, end quote. He or she would become the actual child of God. From the earliest period on, the Egyptians believed that Osiris was of divine origin, that he suffered betrayal, death, and mutilation at the hands of the powers of evil, and that after a great struggle with those powers, he rose again, because he had conquered death. The righteous too might conquer death. He was so exalted that he became the equal and even at times the superior of Ra, the Son God. At his birth into the world, a voice was heard saying, quote, the Lord of all the earth is born, end quote. Budge notes. Another quote from Budge. The worship of Osiris was so widespread, and the belief in him as the God of resurrection so deeply ingrained, that he represented the idea of a person who was both God and human, and he typified to the Egyptians in all ages the being who, by reason of his sufferings and death as a human, could sympathize with them in their own sickness and death, end quote. I think immediately of this passage in the epistles of the Hebrews, quote, for in that he himself has suffered being tempted, he is able to help them that are tempted, end quote. So Osiris was divine, yet in the mid he became a human who lived on the earth, ate, drank, and suffered a cruel death, then triumphed over death through help of the gods, that is Horus, and attained everlasting life. Budge adds, quote, but what Osiris did, they could do. And what the gods did for Osiris, they must also do for them. They, like him, would rise again and inherit life everlasting, end quote. So Horus was so closely associated with Osiris that at times they are virtually interchangeable. We are reminded at the point of the Jesus of John's Gospel, he says, quote, I and the Father are one, end quote. Thus to Osiris this hymn was sung, quote, let thy heart be content, for thy son Horus is established upon thy throne, end quote. In another line from the same hymn, we catch what seems like a forecast of Handel's Messiah. Quote, homage to thee, O thy King of kings, Lord of lords, and Princess of princes, end quote. What is most significant is that no matter how far back researchers go, there is no time. That there did not exist a belief in the resurrection. For everywhere, it is assumed that Osiris rose from the dead, end quote. Eventually, Osiris, quote, became the cause of the resurrection of the dead, and the power to bestow her eternal life upon mortals was transferred from the gods to him. He who was the son of Ra became the equal of the Father, or his father, I should say, and he took his place side by side with him in heaven. End quote. One is reminded of the statement in the Apostle Creed, quote, and he ascended into heaven and sitteth on the right hand of the Father, end quote. He thus became not just the equal of Ra, but in many respects, quote, a greater God than he, end quote. In another phase of the same complex of stories, Horus is all that Osiris was. In one litany from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, it says, quote, thy son Horus is triumphant. The sovereignty over the world has been given to him, and his dominion extends to the uttermost parts of the earth, end quote. But were, quote, the God human, the being who was both divine and human, end quote. Budge writes, quote, in Osiris later on, the Christian Egyptians found the prototype of Christ and in the pictures and statues of Isis suckling her son. Horus, they perceived the prototype of the Virgin Mary and her child, you see, end quote. So what he's saying here is that the Jews themselves who wrote the Bible were ones who, quote unquote, went back to the Osiris story and brought it into their vein and simply deal with the names they created with Jesus and God and Mary, you see. Someone, not naively, that is, he adds that nowhere in the world did Christianity find people whose minds were so thoroughly prepared to receive its doctrines as the Egyptians. Regarding the great goddess that is Isis, he argues that that what appeared most to the Egyptian was her role as, quote, divine mother, end quote. In this character, that is, quote, thousands of statues represent her seated, that is, and suckling her child, Horus, whom she holds upon her knees, end quote. In the book called The Secret Lore of Egypt, Eric Hornung, Hornung, says that, quote, there was a smooth transition from the image of the nursing Isis Lanitates, to that of Maria Lanitates. The miraculous birth of Jesus could be viewed as analogous to that of Horus, whom Isis conceived posthumously from Osiris, and Mary was closely connected with Isis by many other shared characteristics, end quote. The next section is called the Eye of Horus. For those who may be feeling that Horus, the Egyptian Christ, is some remote and obscure figure, that is, from the myths of mythical antiquity, I'd like to show you that his story still touches the lives of virtually every dweller on our planet, regardless of nationality, color, or clime. I don't know what that means. It's interesting. C-L-I-M-E. It's an interesting word. Might be a misprint. The Horus myth tells that he was determined, that is, to avenge his father's murder at the hands of his wicked uncle called Seth. In the battle, Horus' eye was torn out and shredded into fragments. But Thor, who personified divine intellect and was the inspirer of laws for the ancient Egyptians, healed and restored it fully. The completed, renewed eye thus came symbolically to denote wholeness, healing, and health. It was used eventually in the hieroglyphic script to represent unharmed wellness and unity. The symbol then became a mystery sign used by Galen, G-A-L-E-N, the famous Greek physician of the 2nd century, to impress his patients, and its pictogram gradually evolved into the shape of RX, which is today the symbol for a prescription in every country the world over, whatever the language. Have you ever closely examined an American $1 bill? There too you will see the eternal eye of Horus/Osiris, and a pyramid as well. Several of the American founding fathers, most notably, that is, George Washington, belonged to the Masonic order. The Masons based most of their inter-rituals on symbols and ceremonies that originated with the building of the Great Pyramids of Egypt and other Egyptian esoteric lore. The next section is called the afterlife. In Egyptian religion, the belief that the deeds done in the body would be analyzed and scrutinized by the divine powers after death belongs to the earliest period of that civilization. This belief remains essentially the same in all generations and throughout all periods. Each soul was dealt with individually, most often by being, quote, weighed in the balance, end quote, a concept many carvings depicted. We see scales with the individual heart in one pan and a feather, symbolically what we call righteousness or moral law, in the other. This is why it's so important that me and Philip talked about this. If your heart is not light as a feather, meaning that you are innocent and you're spotless, there's nothing to hold against you, then you do not come back here. But if it's the other way around, then you will reincarnate here again. And that teaching once was taught in early Christianity until they destroyed it. The interesting thing, what they did was they little by little, quote unquote, chipped away what was once taught by the pagans early on. The goal was to gain admission to the realms of Osiris. The place of judgment was called the Hall of Maat, M-A-A-T, or M-A-T-E, the plural. This word originally referred to a reed or stick used for measuring. The name was then transferred to two goddesses, that is Isis and Nephilis, who were also called the Mate, M-A-T-E, because they stood by at the judgment representing straightness, integrity, what is true, and what is right. This is what you see. You see pictures of this, folks. This is what this shows. It shows what's going on. It's very important. Significant, both Massey and Kuhn trace the New Testament name Matthew to the root concept. Whether this be so or not, it is undeniable that of the four Gospels, Matthew's is supremely the Gospel of judgment. See especially the great parable of the sheep and goats in Matthew 25. It is also the Gospel where the new Torah, or law of righteousness, the Sermon on the Mount, is found. In the Hall of Maat, the deceased person recites a negative confession in a series of addresses to a jury of 42 gods. He or she names each god and says, I have not committed such and such a sin, end quote. Sins include robbery, false witness, cheating on weights and measures, fits of anger, lying, fornication, blaspheming, and other similar offenses. Now, when we talk about sin with Phil Langdon, sin is simply being unconscious because you don't know who you are. This is what most people on this planet, and including me, we're under what we call being amnesia. That's a better word of saying all of us come here with amnesia. We don't know where we came from because we've lost our memory once we enter this place. As Budge observes, the religious and moral concepts underlying this confession are, quote, exceedingly old, and they give us a clear picture of the high values marking what the ancient Egyptian believed to be his or her duty to both God and neighbor. After the judgment, Horus, who has all the attributes of Osiris, leads the deceased to his father's throne and asks that he or she be accepted into divine presence, quote, and be like unto the fathers of Horus forever, end quote. The deceased then says, quote, I have given bread to the hungry man and water to the thirsty man and clothing to the naked person and a boat to the shipwrecked mariner, end quote. These words are hauntingly echoed many centuries later in the chapter from Matthew just cited above. Quote, for I was hungry and you gave me meat. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you took me in, naked and you clothed me, end quote. It cannot be said too often that what is most striking of all stages and in all forms of the study of Egyptian history, that is the literature and art, is the frequency of the allusion to future life. Yes, indeed. That's my point here. Belief in one God is ancient there, but as Budge often points out, belief in a life to come is older yet. Quote, at least as old as the oldest human remains found in Egypt. end quote. So the Egyptians believed that those who once had lived in this world have, quote, renewed, end quote, their life beyond the grave, quote, and that they still live and will live until time shall be no more, end quote. The souls of the blessed, complete with spiritual bodies, quote, dwell in heaven with the gods, and they partook of all the celestial enjoyments forever, end quote. So the ancient Egyptians believed that a person consisted of a body, soul, and spirit. In spite of all of what some have taught about the meaning of mummification, the Egyptian texts are quite specific. The soul and spirit of the righteous passes from the body and live with all the beautified and the gods in heaven. But the physical body did not rise again. True. And it was believed never to leave the tomb. In the 5th dynasty inscription about 2350 BCE, it states, quote, the soul to heaven, the body to earth, end quote. And we all know this simply. This is just a casing. Well, I don't know if we all know this, but this is a part. This is a physical body. It's not the real us, you see. It's just a way for us to interact here on this particular planet. Budge, however, stumbles over why the Egyptians continue to mummify their dead when they didn't expect the body to rise again. He is at a loss to explain it. He notes that in all the Egyptian texts, there is never once an explanation given for the mummification process. Kuhn, however, believes the mummy meaning is quite clear. Its secret lies in the ancient Egyptian belief in incarnation. The God becomes flesh in every person, as already explained in chapter 3. The mummy was to be a constant reminder of incarnation and its eternal significance. So that's what you're about, see, the body. The body was the vehicle for the divine spirit, just as it was soaked in various medications and spices to preserve it. So too, each individual is, quote, steeped, end quote, in or anointed with soul energies that will endure to everlasting life. So in reality, when he talks about a divine spirit or a vehicle, in reality, simply, this is almost like getting in a car and the vehicle actually driving you around and allowing you to move wherever you want to go. As long as it's on land, you can go for thousands of miles, so to speak. You see. The Egyptians believed in a bodily resurrection, but it was of a purely spiritual kind. The body of deceased changed into a sahu, S-A-H-U, or, quote, incorruptible spiritual body, end quote. It's also in brackets here, shades of what Paul says quite explicitly in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, which passed immediately out of the tomb and went to heaven to dwell with God. According to Budge, this belief in a spiritual body dates even to the prehistorical period. The ultimate destiny of the soul is to become wholly divinized to the papacy of Ankh. The deceased says, quote, my soul is God, my soul is eternity, end quote. Eventually he or she becomes part of Ra himself. The Amdal, already as mentioned, was part of the body of ancient sacred writings dealing with the same theme. As early as the 5th dynasty, that is, the dead were believed, as in the New Testament, book of Revelation, to suffer neither hunger nor thirst. They were robed in white linen and ate of the fruit of the tree of life. In chapter 52 of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, it's made plain that in heaven, relationships were recognized and rejoiced in. In one passage, that is from approximately 1000 BCE, the deceased praised that his father and mother, quote, be given unto me as guardians of my door and for the ordering of my homestead, end quote. Budge points out, quote, he would not have asked this thing if he thought there would be no prospect of knowing his parents in the next world. Thus, we are sure that the Egyptians believed they would meet their relatives in the next world and know and be known by them, end quote. In spite of the highly spiritual tone of all these teachings that is in chapter 11 of the Book of the Dead, shows that the Egyptians believed they would live a semi-material life in the age to come. That is, those spirits they would sow and reap, eat and drink celestial foods, make love, and, quote, do everything even as a person does upon the earth, end quote. Bud concludes his book with the following, quote, Thus we see by what means the Egyptian believed that mortal man could be raised from the dead and attain unto life everlasting. The resurrection was the object with which every prayer was said, and every ceremony performed, and every text, and every amulet, and every formula of each and every prayer was intended to enable the mortal to put on immortality and to live eternally in a transformed, glorified body, end quote. So we're going to stop here. This is part of chapter 5. This is what I'm stopping here, what they call part 1. And we'll come back and do this at another time. And appreciate you being here. Thank you. I consider it an honor to actually talk about these deeper things because I enjoy this. I really do. This is all, in some ways for me, food. You know, it kind of fills me up. What I mean by that is spiritual food. Something that I never knew about, that is, you know, being brought up in a church and their perspective, that is religion. So this is not a religion, folks. It has nothing to do with religion. This is not man-made. This is what people don't understand. Someone made a comment saying this is just nothing about just, you know, theology and religion. No, this is not theology and religion, folks. This is truth. It's a different ballgame. And that's your choice if you want to call it that, but that's not what it is. That's man's idea of what they're promoting. So you get out of that perspective and understand it simply. You're still in the bubble, you see, because you're seeing it as a theology, a religion. It's a bubble, you see, because in reality, religion does do that. It pulls itself and it's not telling you the whole truth. So thank you for being here and wish you a good night. And we'll talk to you soon, and you take care.